Welcome, welcome, welcome. Merrill Chandler here, your host of the Fundability podcast. I cannot wait for you guys to hear this episode. We start the process of evaluating bankruptcies, burn lists, and how to build the most amazing relationships with banks you will ever have. I'll see you on the inside.
In the constantly changing world of fundability, the big question is this: how are entrepreneurs and real estate investors like us, ones who want to grow our businesses and who are tired of paying for really expensive alternative lending, how do we tap into the most inexpensive money available and do it without the hassle of typical borrowing? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. Welcome to the Get Fundable podcast with your host, Merrill Chandler.
Welcome back, everybody. Merrill Chandler here. So, as I said in the intro, bankruptcy. WTF, MF? What we haven't, in all 70 episodes, I have failed those of us who going through COVID, going through the recession, folks who are facing bankruptcy. It's about time we talk turkey about what you're up against deciding about bankruptcy, and maybe even how to do a quote unquote, for those of you who are just listening, a soft landing. So let's take a look at what bankruptcy is, how it's evolved a little bit, and what it means today, because what it means today is radically different than what it was last decade and in the 2000s and in the 1990s. The effects, the true effects and the true efficacy of bankruptcy is very, very different, and it's evolved. And we need to be caught up. A bankruptcy attorney wants you to use them to do a bankruptcy. So let's find out what the skinny is. Number one, bankruptcy, let's go biblical. Let's go epic on this. There was a time, bankruptcy is the codification of literally the Mosaic Law. There was a time where a debt was good for 7 years, and after 7 years, the debt was forgiven. Just, you didn't have debt after 7 years. And that went through the medieval period, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, all the way to the Industrial Revolution. And then when we ended up in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s, this law of forgiving debt after 7 years ended up codified as how long a record stays on your credit profile. And bankruptcy, when you pay it back, it lasted for 7 years after you paid back the debt. But they added, in the early parts of the 20th century, the bankruptcy courts were designed to formalize somebody who legitimately could not, where their quality of life was ruined to such a degree that the debt was forgiven. Now, we're going to be very careful about our terms here. So if you went to and bankruptcy is a federal court. It is not a state court. There's no such thing as a state bankruptcy court. It's a federal law. Federal bankruptcy court allows you to choose one of two types of bankruptcy. A Chapter 7 bankruptcy is the forgiveness of all debt. And you can actually reaffirm some debt, like, hey, can I keep paying for my house? Can I keep paying for my car? I can afford those still, but my revolving debt, installment loans, private debt, all those could be put on a list. It's called a creditor's list. Every debt is put on a creditor's list. It's submitted to the trustee. So it's not a judge that rules over the bankruptcy court. It's a trustee whose job is to balance the needs of the creditors and the lenders against the needs of the borrowers. They've been pretty pro-borrower because that was the intention of the bankruptcy court being established in the first place, was because lenders would charge interest forever and hold captive a borrower and would garnish wages forever. There was before, it was really, really punitive. So I have no problem in there being a third-party escape valve, escape capsule for a borrower to be able to recalibrate their financial lives. Okay. Now, having said that, over the last 4 decades, lenders would write off whatever debt was included and not reaffirmed inside of the bankruptcy. They'd sign off on it, they'd write it off. Sometimes a practice started in the 2000s, really more in the 2000s and the 2010s decades, where they would send a 1099 miscellaneous income, because if you borrowed $20,000 and you went bankrupt on $20,000, it's like you got income of $20,000. And so that would be a 1099 would be sent to you, and you'd have to report it on your taxes as income because it was never paid back. You don't pay back loans. You don't pay taxes on loans that you pay back. The income used to pay back a loan is not taxable. So, because you're paying something back, so there's no income. If you don't pay it back, they saw this little loophole. Hey, let's charge them taxes, and then that would be a write-off for the lender. They'd be able to write it off on their taxes. Well, that was more punitive as well. Lenders can write off uncollectible debt without sending a 1099. So it was just punitive. It was just dirty business. Once again, the lenders were like, you know what? They did me dirty. That borrower did me dirty. Let's charge it against their taxes, even though the lender could already write it off, take it off their books, and since it was a loss, no problem. But doing them dirty. And so there's all kinds of moral arguments one way or the other. I'm simply saying that there are some organizations that were more prone to doing this than others. Okay. So it was elective. It wasn't mandatory to write it off. You didn't have to give a 1099 miscellaneous to a borrower. It was punitive. It was a punishment. It's even become more precarious now for borrowers who are considering bankruptcy. A bankruptcy is a third-party intervention by the United States Bankruptcy Court to say they don't owe you anything any longer. What's interesting, however, is that now bankruptcies, while it may forgive the debt, the institutional memory of the lender is staying 100% keyed into that borrower. And these guys now are not in any way, these lenders now are remembering how much you owe. And American Express was one to start it out. And then it was followed, there's Wells Fargo, the top 4 banks, tier 1 banks, many tier 2 banks are all now starting to remember and keep on their books. One of the data points in automatic underwriting, it's very interesting. One of the data points is, do we recognize this borrower and their social security number, their identifying information? Do they owe us money? And it pings their own internal databases. So when you do a bankruptcy, you guys, they don't just look at your credit report. Let's say you did a bankruptcy 7 years ago, and in 10 years, the Chapter 7 is off your credit report. There is no evidence on your credit report that there's a bankruptcy. And I've had clients go, why am I not getting accepted by Wells Fargo? Because it's been 12 years since I did my bankruptcy and included their account in the bankruptcy. So let's call it $5,000 for our example. Why aren't they lending to me? And I have to remind them, because you still owe them money. Yeah, but I did a bankruptcy. No, you had a third party come in and say, you know what? Forgive them of the debt. It's the law. All right, well, to do banking in the United States, I got to forgive somebody the debt if they file and include me in the creditor list and my $5,000. I have to do banking in the United States. I have to forgive that debt. But I do not have to forget it. So when I'm filling out my application, pings Merrill Chandler, my social, my identity, and says, does this borrower owe me money? And if the answer is yes, it comes back as an immediate decline. And sometimes even the reason code says current outstanding balance. And then, but I did it in a bankruptcy. And that's why I'm holding this particular podcast and why it's so relevant now, because it doesn't matter that you filed a bankruptcy. That's like, your brother, let's put it in a family context. Your brother lends the sister $50. The brother wants the $50 from the sister. Mom says, hey, you don't have to pay to the sister. You don't have to pay him back. And the brother says, fine, whatever. Is the brother going to lend the sister money again when she already owes him $50, but it was forgiven by mom, the authority in the conversation? No, he is not going to ever lend her again. He'll say, hey, you give me back my $50 and I'm happy to set up another arrangement to lend you money, sis. Same thing is going on in the current environment. Lenders ping the data point to see if you already owe them money. If they don't, they say no to you and will even say current outstanding balance, even if it's not on the credit report. So we got to remember the lender database is very, very different than the credit report bureaus that are recording data and can only keep data on for 7 to 10 years. 7 years in the case of a Chapter 13 bankruptcy after it's been discharged, and 10 years after a Chapter 7 discharge. That does not take it off the books of the lender. So we call it at Fundability Inc., we call it the burn list, right? And a burn list is you're on their burn list. You burned their bank for $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, $20,000. And until you pay that money back, you're likely to never get another dime from them. And they'll remind you of this fact. Now, interestingly enough, as part of our fundability modeling, if you want to build a relationship with, let's pick Wells Fargo or Chase or whomever, if you really want to continue to build that relationship, then we want you to pay them back. Now, here's the way, and this is what you guys need to take notes on or otherwise. What you do is you call up the phone number and say, I used to have an account with you, and I included it in a bankruptcy, or bankruptcies are not the only way. Let's say it got charged off. You never paid it and it got charged off. Well, no matter what, it's still owed. I owe you money. I want to know how much money I owe you. And I loved my relationship with you, Chase, B of A, BB&T, Wells Fargo, whomever. I loved my relationship with you. I want to know how to repair this relationship. Think of it as a separation. You and your spouse, you and your loved one, estranged family members. You're making an offer. Hey, I want to repair this relationship. How do we go about that? Usually you want to talk to a supervisor. Sometimes you may want to talk to what's called the executive office. It's a backdoor number where manual underwriting criteria happen, and you can look for those backdoor numbers online. But you want to talk to somebody who can take a moment. We've recommended to clients write a letter to the CEO of that. Now, the CEO is not going to answer you, but they're going to get it to somebody who is going to help you rebuild the relationship with the bank, okay? Instead of the rank and file phone call answerers. It'll go likely to the underwriting department. Once you get in contact with the person who's going to manage your case, I want to repair my relationship with your bank. I understand I owe you, in this example, we said $5,000. I understand I owe you $5,000. I want to have my whole relationship back. If I paid off less than full balance, would that make us whole? Or do I need to pay the entire balance? Listen carefully. I want to do whatever it takes to have this relationship again. Sometimes they may allow less than full balance. Sometimes they may ask for the full balance because you borrowed the full balance, guys. Come on. If you want a relationship, you're like, I'm just going to use a silly example. It's like, honey, I want to come back. I know I had an affair. I promise I'll only have one affair a month if you take me back. No, you want to make an agreement with your spouse and honor the agreement, whatever it is, right? You don't get to, if they accept you having one affair a month, well, okay, then that's the agreement. But the point is you get to make the agreement with your partner, the lender, and honor it. You borrowed the full $5,000 in this case. So figure out a way to retire that. But I promise you, I've never seen an example of it. The second you flip that switch, when they say, oh, zero balance, no money owed, you have created goodwill because their notes, you got to make sure that they're taking notes on this, but their notes say post-bankruptcy, post-charge-off, whatever it was that caused you to not pay it back, post-bankruptcy, the borrower came back and asked to rebuild the relationship with us, and they have paid it in full or paid the new agreement, whatever it was that you negotiated with them. Be generous on their part, you guys. They forgave you a debt 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Be generous back to them, right? If you're lending money, you want the person to come back and be generous with you. We get what we give. Please be generous. Just because they're big institutions, I'm assuming you would love to be Chase Bank or Wells Fargo, and you started out small and started lending, and you became a behemoth lender because of your astuteness in lending. Be generous with them. We get back what we give. So give first. And then once you have made that agreement, that's what creates the goodwill. They will make meticulous notes, especially if you remind them to make meticulous notes on your efforts to rebuild the relationship. They will document it. And then you will be back in the good graces, and you might likely be awarded more opportunities because look at the message you sent. After 5 years, after 10 years, they came back and paid us in full or paid us what we asked. Well, yes, we're going to invest in you again because you came back when you didn't have to. Do you guys get this? You came back and paid us when you didn't have to. The government forgave you. You walked away from the debt and disappeared. Of course, we're going to lend to you. You're going to be their favorite customer because of your integrity, because of your ability to drive this relationship forward when you didn't have to. Of course, they're going to lend to you again. And the higher the tier lender, the more powerful of relationships you can build because all the tier ones and the big tier twos all have business divisions and business lending and commercial lending. Of course, you're going to be their favorite customer because you've already proven that you will come back and make it right with them. And this is just the first of several bankruptcy and debt negotiation, debt reparation podcasts and trainings that I'm going to be doing. But you guys, I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying, what message does it send to the ether, to the universe, to all that is divine in the world when you stand in your integrity and say, thank you for giving me money. I will pay you back, even if I don't have to. This is Merrill Chandler, your host of the Fundability Podcast, your guide to the fundability universe. And thank you for joining me.
Thank you for listening to the Get Fundable podcast. Please leave comments because Merrill would love to read about your aha moments from this episode. And be sure to visit getfundable.com to read our blog, get important links, join our community, and much, much more, like ordering Merrill's tell-all book that is changing the world, The New F Word. And you got to tell your friends about this podcast because we want them to get fundable too.